All right, I've got 10 minutes and a lot of material, so we're gonna move quick. Today we are talking about galls. I think currently is like one of my favorite topics. I've been in the Southeast. I see so many more galls than what I was used to in the West, so it's been a lot of fun to get to know them. Now, the term gall is a very, very generalized term. It can cover anything from bacterial crown gall, where you can see galls that are almost like larger than the tree itself. They weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds. That's a black knot gall on cherry on the left outside my house. And then it can also be anything as small as these little finger galls that you see on various tree leaves. So it's a huge range of what we might actually call a gall. And so then what is the definition of a gall? It's any kind of like structure or deformation on a plant that is agitated or caused by some other organism. However, a gall is always going to be just the plant tissue. It's not like a bird's nest where they're pulling in things from other places to sort of build a structure. A gall is purely made out of tissue supplied by the plant as manipulated by these other organisms. And so galls can be caused by fungi, they can be caused by bacteria, a virus can cause a gall, insects can cause galls, plants can cause galls. We covered that with, say that again? Mistletoe, yeah, thank you. They can be caused by mistletoe. Arthropods, in particular mites, can cause galls. Today we're gonna focus on insects and arthropods in particular. And so these are two examples from the Western United States, and they're really what initially got my interest in galls because of the really unusual morphology. That's a Utah juniper on the left, and it looks, to my mind, like a flower. And on the right, that is a specific type of small willow, coyote willow that occurs in the West, with a pine cone gall. And so we start getting pine cones on deciduous angiosperms, and we start getting flowers on conifers, which that's incredible. And these are structures that are created by tiny little flies. And so really, really fun. So a gall, fundamentally, when a gall is created by an insect or an arthropod, it becomes a living structure that provides shelter, housing, kind of the same thing, but housing and protection, and as well as food to the developing larva. And so this I found on the coast. This is blue jack oak, and this is a species of tiny wasp from the family Cynipidae. They're small, stingless, very common gall-producing wasps that you will find evidence of on oaks. So this is one of these little kernels kind of cut in half, and you can see there's that small chamber in the middle where I've exposed the grub, and I believe that this gall is in the later stages of formation where the lignin content has started to increase, and if we had cut into it a little bit earlier, we probably would have found some softer nutritive tissue that the developing larva would have been feeding on. But fundamentally, that's what a gall is doing to its host that has sort of hacked the plant tissue to engineer these structures. Protection and food. And almost like an externalized womb. So let's meet some of the characters that might produce these galls. Interestingly, one of David's sons actually was able to, underneath that cup right there. Yeah, find. So once this is all over, take a look under this cup. There are two of these cynipid wasps. So not scary, they're not going to sting. They're really, really small. So cynipid wasps, those galls you are going to find almost exclusively on oak trees, and there is an enormous variety of structures that they can produce. Structures are not a good way to group these gall producers by family. Galls or wasps that are very, very closely related might produce very, very different structures. So that's also kind of one of the interesting things, and we'll get into that a little bit. Areophiid mites are also really, really common gall producers. They're unique in the fact that they only have two sets of legs at their front. You need a 40x magnifying microscope in order to see them, so much smaller than normal mites. And they produce sort of an interesting suite of galls, very common in this area. There are aphid allies. What that means is kind of things closely related to aphids that produce galls. On hackberry in particular, we call them psyllid galls. If you've seen the little swellings in the petiole of a leaf, that's really common on hackberry. They also produce these like disc-like galls. Midges, which are essentially tiny, tiny flies, also produce galls on a wide number of hosts. And then Phylloxera, which is another close aphid associate, on hackberry in particular, produces a really interesting variety of structures. And this is my photo. I've kind of cut in half, and you can see there's this dense community of larvae inside that gall that was essentially, it was a blister on a leaf. All right, so some interesting examples from the centipede wasps. So as you can see, these are all pretty closely related, all the same family, but the structures really couldn't be more different. So you're probably going to be familiar with this one on the left. This is wool sower gall. It's really fuzzy. It can be almost red when it's young, or white with red accents. And if you were to cut that in half, you'd find a little chamber at the very center where you would find the larva. This is a super interesting one that I discovered kind of recently, or I learned about more recently. If you look closely, you can see these like tiny discs that match up. Some of them have already fallen off, and you'll see these sort of chicken pox-like marks on the leaf. These are structures created by these small wasps. At a certain point, they dehiss or detach from the underside of the leaf, and they fall down, and the developing larva will start to kind of cause the gall to jump. And what they're trying to do is to get the gall to settle into a crack or underneath some like leaves where it'll be protected for the rest of its development. So it's called like jumping gall wasp or something interesting like that. And then we also have what are called bullet galls, also produced by the same family of wasps. There's just going to be a single larva at the center of these, and this is on Quercus lyrata, or overcup oak, which I just learned recently is actually native to this area. Kind of another topic for another time. So wide variety. With the Areophyid mites, oftentimes you're seeing these as like pouch galls. So there will be a rough kind of blister on top of the leaf, and then there is a depression that kind of is the inverse on the underside of the leaf. And it's in that depression where you would find, if you could see them, like I said, you need 40x magnification to see these mites. Yeah, that's where you'd see them on the underside of the leaf. This is one I just found by my house a couple days ago. This is poison ivy mite gall. Really beautiful. It also has the nice advantage of making poison ivy a little bit more obvious. In the middle, this is beech urinium mite. This is a really common one. I'd be really surprised if you hadn't seen this.
Uranium?
Or erinium, yeah. Yeah, or you can just say mite galls on beech. And these are all very host specific. The biochemistry of each individual plant is going to be very different. That's part of why we separate them into species. And so these mites, wasps, flies, they have to develop a very specific suite of hormones they produce in order to manipulate this plant tissue. So oftentimes they have one or two hosts, and that's it. So those look like egg masses, but they're not. They're just really tiny structures that are produced by the mites. And again, just kind of mind-blowing in the wide number of possible structures. This is elm finger gall on American elm there, caused by a tiny little mite. So a huge mansion, tons of food. Imagine if you could get housing and food simply by nibbling on like a 4x4. It's a pretty good deal. All right. So the aphids, again, more really wide variety, very host specific. So this is witch hazel. All the way on the left, and these are all things I've photographed within Chapel Hill, by the way. So that's witch hazel cone gall. This is very similar looking, but totally different genus. This is Phylloxera in the middle. Phylloxera, there's a wide array of different gall structures. And then all the way on the right, this is Psyllid, which is also called the jumping leaf lice, but closely related to aphids. That's on hackberry. Yeah, and then there are the midges, just moving a little bit faster. So again, just the wide variety of potential structures is really astonishing. This is one of my favorites of all time. This is bald cypress. These look like beautiful flowers. You can see this in the area if you start looking closely at bald cypress. But that's caused by a midge, these tiny little flies. And I think might be one of my favorites in this area. All right, so for the most part, these are doing very little, if any, harm to their hosts. There are two interesting exceptions here, gouty oak gall and horned oak gall. I've seen this more commonly in the Midwest, Michigan, where you see oaks that have died and every single branch, every single twig is affected by these. It is in North Carolina, but I only know that from the NC State information pages. I've never personally seen it. But there is a little bit of a debate, chicken or the egg. Are these galls being produced because the insects prefer stress trees, which produce more sugar content in their sap than regular trees, and so they're an indication of stress rather than a cause of stress, or are they themselves doing the damage? It's a little unclear. And then I just want to finish off with a great quote from E.O. Wilson, who was a Southern naturalist. There's a building named after him at UNC. He was an entomologist first, but then kind of became a well-known environmentalist and ecologist. And if we were to wipe out insects alone on this planet, the rest of life and humanity with it would mostly disappear from the land within a few months. So that's a pretty interesting statement, and I just always like to reinforce that with clients. It's going to be impossible to have a bug-free yard unless you just want a dead yard. So with the galls, they're there for our appreciation. I think they add aesthetic interest to plants. They will occasionally damage individual stems, but largely are not doing a lot of harm.
Nice work, Jeff.
Before you get ready, we'll go over a few things.